Good morning, everybody. Should be able to see the whiteboard right there. With the hearts. Man, I just look really fuzzy and I'm not sure why. There's something. I think it was legitimately dirty. That's hysterical. All right, so that is good there. All right, that's not going to help me, and I'm closing that there. I am where I don't have to. I can. It's chilly here, and it's trying not to be chilly, but it's still chilly. It doesn't know whether it wants to be chilly or not. Okay, so we got that. Now my kids know not to touch my stuff, or I break their arms. Oh, that's right. I was going to add more content. Oh, hey, look, that's done. We can close that. I probably look fuzzy because I haven't shaved for a couple of days. You're a grown-up. People who can clean up their own messes are welcome to touch my stuff. People who touch my stuff and make a mess that I have to clean up, different deal entirely. And again, same with the no candy in the car. You can have candy in my car so much as you clean up any mess you make with said candy in my car. Is the volume quiet for everybody else? Is it just Stacy? Normal volume for Mark? Good. All right, Stacy, do you have a banana in your ear by any chance? Ooh. Hello, Dan Christian. MVP. Want that. I'm actually whispering, but only to Stacy. did that happen? OneNote. Thank you. I think. All right. I'm going to go refill my juice. You guys don't go anywhere. I will be right back. Chat amongst yourselves. Shall be returned. I am back. Okay, Stacy, have you got your audio issues figured out? You're not going to want to miss any of this. I feel bad for you already. Okay, so I've got that. I've got that. Lori, are you ready? I assume you're ready. You're always ready. You're always waiting on us. That's the camera. That's the notes. Corey Slurry's ready. All right, Lori. Actually, let me. Cold weather, making my lips dry. Brett, I was just going to suggest using PowerShell to test your mail. Send mail messages. Every SharePoint admin's friend. Turn on my foot warmer. Can't podcast with cold feet. All right, I think I'm going to need that web browser thing here with my stuff in it. Okay. All right, folks. Everybody, take your seats. Quiet down. Lubricate my instrument. Okay. Right size that web browser. Here we go. Visual cue for me. Squeaky chair. Hello, everybody. Welcome to podcast 432 of Shane and Todd's Cloudy Podcast. Now, those of you that are enjoying the video feed will notice I am all alone. Shane is not with us this week, but let's turn that frown upside down. Let's turn this into a positive thing. You get me all to yourself, just you, just me. None of that Shane guy messing anything up. It'll be a very intimate podcast, 432. First, I want to say thanks to the folks at Syskit. They make some great tools. They released a new version of Syskit Security Manager, I believe. When I'm doing consulting with customers, I do mostly Office 365 these days. Security is the question everybody has. How can I tell who has access to what? How can I tell what files are shared with whom? All these kind of things. Syskit Security Manager is a great way to discover all that information. You can go to syskit.com. Up in the top, there's products, Syskit Security Manager, and there is a free demo. So you can try it out for 30 days. You'll fall in love with it. I know I did. So check that out. And make sure that when you do that, you tell them how great my little sign looks. I actually had a customer comment on this a couple of days ago that my Syskit sign looked pretty weak. I told him, I agreed with him, and that I should replace it. It looked pretty bad, but I was not going to replace it because it irritated Shane, and that had immense value to me. I really enjoy those kind of situations. So as long as it bothered Shane, I was going to keep it in its glory, its crooked glory. Don't tell Shane that I admitted to that. For topics this week, there are a ton, and I picked just a few. I've been swamped this last week. Office 365 has been very popular. Many people wanting to adopt it, migrate to it, and all that. But in the news this week, there has been kind of two rivaling things. Microsoft has had their Build conference going on, which is a conference for developers, and they've announced a bunch of things there. So my Twitter stream has been very active. And then Google has had their event this week also, and there have been announcements there. I have Google phones. I've got Google devices, so I've been kind of watching a little bit of both. There's been a lot out there. I haven't had a chance to kind of chew it all up yet and understand it. But I'm just going to talk about a few things that that I've seen in the last week. One of them, this was not a build thing. This came out a week ago. Tony Redmond, who writes for Office 365 ITpros.com. You can also see him at Petri.com. And if you've ever walked past an Exchange server, if you've walked past an Exchange server in the last 20 years, you know who Tony Redmond is. He's a big name, been around forever. He posted a blog post on May 2nd at Office 365 ITpros.com about how SharePoint Online, you can now rename your site URLs. So if you have a site collection, Todd's team, and then you want to rename it to Shane's team, something like that. He's got screenshots of this happening. Again, he posted this a week ago, and I have not seen it in any of the tenants that I have access to. Now, I have not checked this morning, but as of yesterday afternoon, none of my tenants have had it, and they're all on the fast cycle. So I don't know how this is rolling out, but this is pretty exciting that we'll be able to change the URLs. And he shows how to do it in the SharePoint, central admin, the SharePoint admin page in Office 365. And when you hover over the properties of a site, when you hover over the URLs, a little edit button pops up, and he shows changing it. Again, I haven't been able to test it myself because it doesn't show up in any of my tenants. So he talks about how so obviously with groups and sharing and all that, things are very intertwined. I think Microsoft has done a good job laying a foundation for this. And in the background, things aren't shared by URL, they're shared by GUID and things like that. And so this should not break sharing. He mentions that when he did it, he had some sharing links that broke for a while, but then it takes, in the background, all that fixes up, and so your sharing links will continue to work. You don't have to worry about that. Stacy in the chat room mentions that this is huge. This is absolutely huge. This has all kinds of implications for renaming, working with customers, trying to figure out the namespace inside of Office 365 is always tough, and departments get renamed and things like that, and it's very difficult to get them to find names that will work now, that will also work 2 years from now, 5 years from now. And the fact that until whenever this rolls out in my tenant, I've not had a chance to rename it. This is one of the ways that we can fix that. Now, I wouldn't use this a lot because people shortcut, make bookmarks and that, and I don't know how well that redirection works. Also, I don't know what happens to that namespace. If you have a name and you rename it to something else, how quickly you can use the old name again, or whether you can, I don't know anything about that. This is also a good opportunity if you have classic sites, so classic team sites, and you want to make modern team sites out of them, but you can't actually update team sites. So then you get this weird deal where you've got a classic team site, but a modern library and modern pages and all this weird thing. Now you have the opportunity to create a new modern team site with all the modern goodness, and then do the URL swappy thing and make all that out. So again, I look forward to having this in my tenants and being able to play with this. I also imagine that we will be able to see this in PowerShell at some point, either PNP PowerShell or SPO PowerShell, something like that. We'll be able to do that. So kudos to Tony for that. I wish I had the magic sauce that he has in his tenant, because that would be very fun. Another thing, I didn't have this in my notes, but one of the blog posts that I've been finding myself going to a lot, and so much that I added a link to it on the home page, like on my nav bar on my blog, blog hosted on SharePoint 2010, world-renowned as a premier blogging platform. It's my blog post about which Office 365 PowerShell modules I use and how to update them and all that. I'm going to have a companion blog post coming out on how to do some updating, but I've added that at the top. And so if you're using PowerShell with Office 365, that is, for me, as I'm setting up a custom machine or playing with any of my machines, that's now my go-to page on what versions of PowerShell commandlets are out there, how to install particular PowerShell commandlets. So if you don't know which ones you should have on a new machine, you can go to that page. It's got the install command. It's all there. I'm going to be adding a blog post on how to automatically update them, things like that. But I use that all the time. And so hopefully at some point, when the SPO or the PNP PowerShell comes out and supports this URL renaming, you'll be able to go to this page, see if you've got the latest version, and then run the commands there and update that. So I try real hard not to be a guy that toots his own horn a lot, but this blog post was one of my favorites. And like I said, I go to it so often now that I just put a link right in the header there so that I can get to it more quickly. Another one of the announcements that came out, and I don't think I have this in my browser for my notes. Let's close that. Let's link that. I think this is something that was announced at last year's SharePoint conference or something similar to it, but earlier this week, Chris McNulty at Microsoft published a blog post on Tech Community on how to create SharePoint lists easier. And there's really two ways that that they show how to do this now, and it's pretty exciting. Like, I don't get real excited about end-usery things. I'm not a good SharePoint user. Moving kind of up a stack from SharePoint Server on-prem to Office 365 and SharePoint Online, the things that I do for customers has changed, and this is part of that change. So these kind of changes do excite me. But this is completely in end-user space. And this is a change to SharePoint Online where you will be able to create a SharePoint list from one of two places. One is from an existing SharePoint list. So you can take a list. So this would be the old list, save as template, upload template, whatever. But now you can just do it right from inside of SharePoint. You can say, I want to create a new list. I want to create it from this other list. It takes the schema of the list, none of the data, but the entire structure, custom metadata columns, all of that, and makes this into a new list. So this is super handy if you've got different lists that common lists that you want to create. This is a great one. So I applaud them on that. And then the other one is you can create a list from an Excel spreadsheet. And the way that this works is you just go into Excel and highlight rows and then copy and paste. So you can create a list from Excel table, and poof, it just shows up there, columns and data and all that. It's pretty exciting. So this is just another great way when people say, why should I move to SharePoint Online, or why should I update from classic to modern? These are the things they just keep dropping. Like this just dropped on a Sunday in May, just not doing anything else. This is part of the dream that we're living. So that's fun stuff in there. I applaud them for adding that into SharePoint Online. Dan Christian makes sure that I know that it's been there for a while, so I apologize for talking about something that's already been there. Thanks to Dan for clearing that up. Trying to think of, so John Liu just jumped into the chat room. John is a longtime friend of mine from the SharePoint world. John has moved into the Flow world, and so I've got some Flow things, but I had him later in the podcast, but I'm going to move him up since John is here. So I want to see John. And John is saying SharePoint Saturday Atlanta, I'm going to be there. He's seen those names. So one of the new technologies that we get to play with in SharePoint Online is Microsoft Flow. And as an admin, one of my frustrations with Flow and Power Apps is the admin experience is not where I want it to be. And it's also not where my customers want it to be. When I work with IT departments, they get concerned about users using things that they don't know how to use because they can create problems, and they want to be able to control things. I'm not sure that I completely want them to be able to lock things down, lock functionality down as much as they want to, but the request does come in there. And for Flow and Power Apps, that admin experience is just not where I want it to be. And one of the ways that it falls down is it's not really easy for a SharePoint admin or a tenant admin to discover where flows are at. Now, this isn't just from being the refuser and IT wanting to not let people use flows, but there are a couple of situations where it becomes very important, and that is when people leave the company. And if they owned a flow, or if somebody else owned a flow but their information was used in the flow, this can become a big deal if admins can't find this. There's a couple of ways to do it. There's some weak flow PowerShell out there that will do it, and I've got a blog post on that I've not published, but that will let a tenant admin cycle through and see all the flows in their environment. But Serge, a friend of ours, Serge Luca, he, again, a longtime SharePoint guy, a month or so ago, he wrote a blog post on using a flow to find all the flows, which I thought was funny. It reminds me of those old memes from the rapper Exhibit, you know, yo dog, I hear you wanted to write a flow about your flow. So that was one way to do it. You can write a flow that will cycle through all the flows and give you a list of all those. And then here a week or so ago, he updated and wrote a super flow to get you a list of your flows and all that. So if you use flow and you want to keep an eye on those things, go check that out. And or if you're an admin and don't really use flow but just are curious where they're at and how they're exposed and those kind of things, check that out. I've read through a little bit. I've not actually used this flow, but I know that people have used it for a while. So there's a lot in there. And this is one of those new frontiers. I'm pretty excited about flow and Power Apps and the thing and what they can do to enable users to think outside the box and expand their business applications. It's exciting times. And I like Serge, again, taking up that mantle, you know, much like Shane did with apps and Power Apps and Flow. Good to see these familiar faces doing cool new things. Another interesting thing, and I haven't read through this entirely, but Bill Baer from the SharePoint team published a blog post on Monday about some changes to Microsoft Search. And this is this ability, and we've had this for a while, where you can tie your tenant search into Bing and have one search experience where you can see all of the information from your tenant. So you can go to Bing and you can search for something that would give you results from the internet, but it will also work in results from your tenant. And it's a pretty great experience. And Bill has a blog post about that, and then it just shows some really weird searches you can do and how you know, things like, can I bring my cat to work? If you go to Bing, if your tenant and your users have this all connected, you can go to Bing and search for can I bring my cat to work, and it will give you your company policy on whether you can bring your cat to work. Hopefully that's good. I know that I can bring my cat to work, but my work environment's pretty easy going. So I know it's in praxis. We've played with this a little bit, and it's fun. We're not big enough that I think it's probably very useful, but for other companies it might. And search is one of those pieces of technology that I've been saying for probably more than 10 years now. Search is one of those unsung heroes inside of SharePoint, and it's now the backbone to all these other pieces of functionality. You know, the graph, and this is just another way where they're just taking another piece and bringing another more information in, another interface, and being able to leverage all that great search smarts. So check that out. And I read the blog post. It's been a while since I've set this up. I can't remember exactly all the steps, but it's interesting seeing what functionality is coming out of there. Mark in the chat room is asking if I have a mini fridge full of beer at work. I don't have a mini fridge full of beer because I don't drink beer, but I do have many fridges in this house. They have varying degrees of juice and water, you know, Gatorade, that kind of stuff. But my boss is very understanding about that. They let me do that any day of the week. It's not just Friday afternoons, whenever I want to. What is in the... So this is an interesting one as well. One of the announcements that came out of Build this week was a new piece of functionality. Again, this is a developer conference about a thing called the Fluid Framework. And the Fluid Framework, from what I can understand, again, this is a developer topic, and I haven't completely paid attention to it, but it is a framework that developers can use for their apps that bring in documents from Office 365 and allow real-time collaboration and updating and all that from inside of this other app. So the example that they use is you can write an application that pulls data from a Word document or pulls a table from a Word document into your into your application, and then gets updated as the actual Word document gets updated, or if you update it in your application, it gets updated in Office 365 or other Office programs, Teams, things like that. So this is really interesting because there's a lot of information stored in Office documents, Excel spreadsheets, and Word documents, and it's information that gets reused, and it's information that doesn't always get reused in its exact, its full context. So this makes it possible to pull out the pieces of information that you want, put them in where they make sense for whatever this is, and it's all still dynamically linked. So I'm pretty excited about this. This is something that the application has to bring in. So they mentioned something like Slack. Slack doesn't have it, but if it did, then you'd be able to paste a Word table into Slack, and then as you updated the Word document, that post in Slack would get updated. I haven't talked to any of my developer buddies to see what they think about this, but it looks pretty cool. I'm excited about that. This was a fun one, and it's something I hadn't really thought about. And honestly, this has happened to me, but it's always been a bad thing. Daryl Webster, you might know him on Twitter as Daryl as a Service, has a blog post about forgetting his headset and using a companion device with Microsoft Teams. So we've talked on this podcast a little bit about Teams, and I sort of have this tolerate-hate relationship with Teams is probably the best way to describe that. I don't think of work in the way that Teams wants me to think of work, and it's frustrating. But Daryl's blog post is one where he was on the road, and he's from New Zealand, so he tries to travel light because just lugging a bunch of stuff halfway around the world gets painful. And he had to join a Teams call, and it was a Teams call with visual document sharing, screen sharing, and all that. But he had forgotten his headset, or the headset battery was dead. I forget exactly what the problem was. So he wanted to join the meeting and see it on the screen of his iPad, the bigger screen that he had, but he didn't have any way to hear it. So what he did was he joined the team both from his iPad and his phone, and then watched the video on the iPad, but then held his phone to his ear so he could hear the audio and work like that. Pretty clever. I carry a lot of, I think probably at any time when I'm traveling, I have 3, maybe 4 sets of headphones in my backpack just so I don't get stuck in a similar situation. But this is a clever workaround to get that so he could participate, see the screen, hear everything, but not annoy the people around him. We all hate that person at the airport or really any public space that has a device and they're watching a movie with the sound or playing a game with the sound, or yes, even on business meetings with the sound where everybody can hear it. I'm glad to hear that Daryl's not that guy. That's a bad person to be. But I like how he did that. Now, I've talked about how this has bitten me in the past. One of my issues with Teams is the more that Teams gets adopted, the more collisions that I have where 2 things are going on at Teams at the same time. It's usually a meeting of some sort with visuals and audio and all that, and then a chat, and most of the time unrelated. Switching between those inside of Teams is painful, and you can't have multiple Teams windows open, so you have no option other than switching between those. Then you get in this thing where, you can open up Teams in a web browser, and I have reduced myself to that a few times, but that comes with a whole bunch of other problems because then you've got another web browser where if you click a link somewhere, like in an email, then it potentially pops up in the wrong browser because you've got this other browser open. The browser version of Teams doesn't support everything, so you have to figure out where you want to have Teams. Like if it's only going to be chat, I can do that in the browser. If I think anybody's going to want me to share my screen in this meeting, I can't use the browser, so I have to do this one in full Teams. It gets pretty awful. If you're watching the web view, and you can get that on YouTube or whatever, or the video of this podcast, you'll see behind me I've got another machine. Part of the reason I have a second machine here is because of Teams, because that way I can have 2 things going at the same time and get the full experience, because a couple of times I've needed to be able to do that. But then we get this deal where if I'm in a meeting and people are chatting and the chimes are going off, it's going off on both machines because they're both logged in as the same user, but I'm paying attention to one team here and a different team there. And I've had this situation, and I've not tried to reproduce it because I'm afraid to, where I wanted one machine to stop chiming because that wasn't the meeting I was in. And then as soon as I did that, it kicked me out of the meeting in the other machine, and I couldn't get back into the chat. So having two Teams clients connected to the same meeting at the same time has caused me grief. There was much swearing and gnashing of teeth, but I'm glad that Daryl has been able to wrangle Teams to use this. So this was kind of an interesting idea to watch from his iPad, but listen to his phone. Kudos to Daryl for that one. I think that's everything. One of the things I wanted to follow up with last week, Shane and I talked about our networking hardware at home, and he was extolling the virtues of the Ubiquiti hardware. And the Ubiquiti hardware covers two areas for him, and now for me, is we use Ubiquiti wireless access points. And I've used those for several years now. And then he got a new Ubiquiti router gateway, networking device. And I had one from several years ago. I had an older model, and I got a new one like his this last week. So I kind of wanted to give an update on that. It worked out pretty well. One of the problems so right now Wi-Fi runs at 2.4 gigahertz, and it's run at that frequency since they used it back in the Old Testament. And then the newer Wi-Fi is 5 gigahertz. Now the benefit of 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is that you can get more speed, more throughput. The bad news about 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is that it's really susceptible to interference. For instance, it's probably about as bad as if you hold up a sheet of paper or think about holding up a sheet of paper between the access point and your device. It really hurts the 5 gigahertz signal. And also a bunch of cheap things, Internet of Things devices, like I've got these smart plugs and webcams. A lot of them use 2.4 gigahertz because the chipset's cheaper. There's probably licensing costs. I don't know. But the Ubiquiti thing handles both of those, so I've used that for a while. But then because 5 gigahertz doesn't go as far, we're now at the spot where even if your house isn't that big, you probably need more than one access point if you want 5 gigahertz everywhere. And that's one of the reasons that I moved over to Ubiquiti years ago, was because I was in that spot. And there's a bunch of solutions out for it now. I know Google's got them and everybody else, but I was able to have one wireless network that had multiple access points throughout my house, all managed in one spot. Fairly seamless handoff, and the devices depends a lot on the device. So I've been doing that for a while. So I talked Shane into that several months ago because he was having the same problems. And then he went a step further and he bought some of the new Ubiquiti networking gear. And then the interface that you use to control all your access points, your networking gear also comes back in, so you can see all the reports in one spot, manage from one spot. It's a pretty great deal. My old networking gear did not allow that. Not a huge loss, but it was several years old and it didn't do some of the things that I wanted it to do. So I bought the new gateway last week and got that set up. Worked out pretty well, pretty seamless. I'm having some problems at home with DHCP, and I think those predate any networking changes that I've made. And so I've got a couple of boxes that haven't completely gotten on my network yet. But overall, I'm a pretty big fan. So if you are, I wouldn't recommend this for like my mom. Number one, they probably don't need the fast network. And number two, it's a prosumer type of hardware. It's a little more work than you normally have to go through. But for folks that are listening to this podcast, because I assume it's technical folks, unless you've watched everything else on the internet and this is like the last thing ever to watch, you're probably going to be okay with it. The way Shane went is there is a device that you can buy called the Cloud Key that is the management portal for this. I've not gotten one of those. The way that I have went is you can run the management software on Windows or Linux. I know Jonathan Mast is running it on a Raspberry Pi. That's how you get in and manage the devices. And that's probably a little tough for the average user. But for us technical folks, we can handle that. But it works pretty well. I can get in there. I can see all of my access points. I can see if they're online and how many clients they have and what kind of luck clients are having getting attached to them, what frequencies. I can see all the clients. I can see their IP addresses and names. I can kick people off. I haven't done it yet, though Shane has. You can set up multiple wireless networks. And so he's got his kids' devices on a wireless network that he can shut off and that he can throttle so they don't take all the bandwidth. You can set up a guest network so you don't have to give people your Wi-Fi code. It's pretty solid functionality. And then there's all kinds of reports. You can see how much bandwidth you're using, how much each individual client's using. It's pretty nice. So if you go to toddclint.com/podcast431, which is last week's podcast, there are links to all the hardware on Amazon that you can buy. I'm a big fan. I know some of my other nerd friends have the same Ubiquiti hardware, and it's been working out pretty well for them. So I wanted to give that a shot, a little follow-up. The next time Shane and I are on together, we'll probably circle back on that and talk a little bit more. that is the topics that I had in today's notes. Again, I've been busy. I've not been paying attention to the news like I oughta. But I have good news. Today's Wednesday. Well, the day that I record it, the day that you listen to it's probably Wednesday in June sometime, maybe later. But Friday, I fly down to Atlanta for SharePoint Saturday Atlanta. The senior executive producer of the podcast, Lori, she's going to be down there, going to pick me up at the airport. We're going to be at SharePoint Saturday Atlanta on May 11th. So thanks to Dan Addis for reaching out and inviting me to that. So if you're going to be there, go ahead and say hello. I very friendly, would love to meet you. But I'm going to be talking about groups and why I like groups so much. And if you do say hello, say it early because I got an early flight heading back. So find me in the morning. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll be at the SharePoint conference in Las Vegas. So that's May 21st through the 23rd. Shane and I are doing a pre-conference session on Monday on May 20th. So if you haven't signed up for that, go ahead and do that. We're going to be there. Shane's going to be there. I do not believe that Lori will be there. So the entire podcast crew will not be there. Sad face for that. I'm expecting we will see a lot more SharePoint and Office 365 announcements coming out of that here in the next couple of weeks. And again, if you see us at the conference, Shane or I, for goodness sakes, come up and introduce yourselves. We're pretty friendly folks. And then I think Shane and Lori are going to be at the Microsoft Business Application Summit June 9th through 11th. So we're getting pairs of the podcast folks. You can never have all three of us in the same room at the same time, for liability purposes, things like that. So they'll be doing the Business Application Summit in June. And, I forgot, I got this out of order. Next Thursday night, I will be on the Power Scripting Live podcast, and you can find that on YouTube. Let me throw a link here in the notes. And again, any podcast that you're at, you can go to toddclint.com/podcast and then the podcast number. All the links, everything I talk about, the links are in there. The Power Scripting Live podcast is a podcast. It predates this one. It came out in 2007, and they have been a very long-running podcast, and it's all about PowerShell. And it's had some of the big names on there. Don Jones has been on there 100 times. Jeff Snober's been on there. They sent a thing out. I can't remember where I saw it. They were asking for speakers. And I'm like, well, there's a million other great speakers, but I'll throw my hat in the ring. And they took me. So everybody else must have been busy next week. I appreciate that. So speaking with them, I did speak on their podcast like 10 years ago. It was great. I'll have to bring that up and see if I can find it. But I'm going to be talking about, with the gang, Office 365, PowerShell, kind of the process I use when I make PowerShell. I find myself these days writing a lot of PowerShell to help with migrations and management and all of that in Office 365. And my process has been, so I'm going to kind of talk through that process and how I'm trying to make tools as opposed to use tools. He's not in the chat room right now, but Jeff Hicks has been very helpful in that regard. I bounce all of my dumb PowerShell questions off of him, and he's very... he's a little snarky, but very gracious in offering me answers. He's been very helpful. So if you have a chance, you can subscribe to their YouTube channel, Power Scripting Live, or else I think it's broadcast live on May 16th. So that pretty much wraps it up. The PowerShell thing's interesting. We kind of have our tiers. I bothered Jeff about things. A couple of people from the podcast, I won't name names, but they have also reached out to me on Slack with PowerShell questions, and I hope I have been helpful to them. But if you're in the Slack channel, and you can go to toddclint.com/podcast, and there's a link there to request an invitation to the Slack channel. You can join us live. You can heckle me live when I'm doing the podcast. But then a couple of folks have also used that to reach out to me during the week if they're having PowerShell questions or whatever. Haven't always been able to help, but certainly try to help when I can. So hopefully those folks appreciate that. But if you've got those kind of questions here and there, feel free to jump in and join the Slack channel. I've got it open all the time, so I don't just watch it on Wednesday mornings. So that is it. Yeah. So Mark in the chat room is saying that Don and Jeff are both big proponents of tool making. And this is one of the things I'm always very nervous about sharing my PowerShell with anybody because I just know how terrible it is. And I gave Jeff a snippet of code that I was doing some stuff, and he's like, "Here, you should here's a website that'll help you with that." And he sent me a link to his book on writing tools. Like, I hear you, but that's how I write things. Yeah, they literally wrote the book, Mark, and he sent me a link to it. That is how I look at my PowerShell projects right now. Is, I'm not going to be the person that's going to be using this. How can I make it as user friendly as possible? And I think that has really helped me write better PowerShell. Has made me more aware of errors and where things are going to go wrong, which of course helps me when I run it. So that's been good. And yeah, so it was very much like sending me let me Google this for you link. It was, again, Jeff's he's very helpful, but he got a little edge to him. It makes things interesting. It's fun. So shout out to that. But yeah, so if you've got questions, happy to bounce, especially if they're Office 365 related, because that's where I spend most of my day. So that we're going to wind that down. Oh, I did want to mention, since Dan Christian is in the chat room, SharePoint Saturday Charlotte is August 10th. Go sign up for that. I will not be there, as far as I know. Neither will Lori or Shane, but sign up for that. It's the SharePoint Saturday events. I cannot believe that they are going as strongly as they are this many years later. I love the SharePoint Saturday events. But I just figured, like, this is one of these things that can't last and can't be as great as it is, but it has been going strong legitimately for 10 years. Like, every weekend there are SharePoint Saturday events all over the world, all the time. It's amazing to me. So I'm glad that I'm able to help out this weekend with Atlanta. Wish I could do more of them. But definitely go visit Charlotte if you're going to be in that area. Chat room, stick around for a bit. I will be answering questions and mocking accordingly. For those of you listening out there, you can reach out to me. I'm at Todd Clint on Twitter. Shane is at Shane's Cows. You can always find the latest versions, the latest editions of this podcast at toddclint.com, and our YouTube channel, Todd Clint Netcast. Let us know what you think. If you've got topics you'd like to hear us talk about, give us a shout, and we will see you next week. And we're off. Yeah, we're not going to do the Game of Thrones thing if Shane's not here. Yeah, I went to Mech back in the day as well. Good conference. Did you want to chat about Game of Thrones, Mark? I am happy to indulge any of that. I think without Shane here, I think most folks on the podcast aren't listening to it or in the chat room, so I wasn't going to make them suffer through it. Oh, Lori, I forgot to add your thing. Sorry about that. Your note was at the bottom and I forgot about it. I apologize. Yeah, no, and I was going to talk about it, and I forgot to put it in. I agree with that, Mark. And so this is not for anybody who is a Game of Thrones fan necessarily. The big thing on the internet was that there was a Starbucks cup left in one of the scenes. And I trust very little of what I see on the internet these days. So I started seeing those stories pop up on Monday, and I went to HBO Now, rewatched the episode, and sure enough, there's a scene of Game of Thrones where there's a Starbucks cup that one of the craft people had left on the table. And what I really love, I love a lot of things about the internet, the cat videos and all that. But I love how creative people just go with that. So there have been a ton of Game of Thrones memes where they've like had a shot of a street and they've worked in an old-timey looking Starbucks sign in the background. Man, I just love that. That stuff cracks me up. And yeah, like Mark's saying, they went through and they fixed it so you can't watch it anymore. And that is so for Game of Thrones folks, or really folks that enjoy any modern movies, I really love the behind the scenes videos that they do. Like there's a 45-minute behind the scenes video of how they shot the big battle scene, The Long Night. And it is just fascinating from a technology standpoint. You don't even need to care about the story, just from a technology standpoint, all the amazing things that they can do. So for instance, like the taking the Starbucks cup out, as far as I know, they didn't know about that Starbucks cup until late Sunday night, early morning. And they were able to edit that video, completely re-render it, and populate it everywhere within about 24 hours. That is amazing that they were able to do all that. But if you watch the behind the scenes for The Long Night, they show so many great tech things. And one of the ones that I thought was the best was they were talking about one of the directors, and he was saying that they like to use real footage whenever they can. So obviously there's CGI that will do a bunch of things, but they try to use real footage whenever they can, and then they just augment it with technology when they have to. But it's funny because of the technology that they augment it with is like the highest end technology ever. So they were showing there's a scene where a human gets picked up by a giant and she kills the giant, and then whatever, not important to the plot. But they showed how they filmed that. Now, clearly they don't have a giant. So they filmed the woman, the actress, and they had the typical thing where they had the stick with the thing at the top so she knew where to focus her eyes. And they were showing her filming that because they wanted to film her real movements and all of that. But then the director, as he's watching the filming going on, so they're, the scene's acting out, they've got the camera, he's got the monitor on the camera. In real time on the monitor for the camera, they have superimposed the giant over top of the stick with the ball so that he can see what the scene's really going to look like in real time while it's filming, which is just amazing. And then they showed filming the giant. So the guy that played the giant was 7'5" I think. They doubled his height, so 15-foot guy. And then they used a size correct doll for her body for him to act with, and did the same technique. So the giant is acting with a doll that's made to proportionally look like her. But as the director's watching the film, watch it being filmed, they're superimposing the stuff that they'd filmed with her on top of that in real time. Man, I mean, there's so many other things that they did. So the technology is just amazing. Really enjoy watching those. And I'm a nerd. I like to know how things work. So the behind the scenes, I just love that kind of stuff. I eat it up. They were talking about another scene that was interesting. There was a long trench with wooden posts, wooden spikes in it that ended up getting set on fire. They talked about how they really dug the trench, really put every wooden post in there, every stake got it looking exactly the way that they wanted it. But then because they knew they were going to have to film it multiple times, they didn't want to burn the wood up, so they replaced every piece of wood with iron that looked like wood so they could set it on fire. The effects were just... Really enjoy that kind of stuff. So even if you don't watch Game of Thrones, look for some of the Game of Thrones behind the scenes videos. They're all on YouTube. It's pretty interesting. Well, I think I'm going to kill the stream. I'm going to stay in the chat room for a bit. We can chat more. I think... some of the podcasts I listen to are language podcasts, and one of them that I listened to, I can't remember which one it was, had the guy that invented the Dothraki language, and just all of the things that he worked into it, and the things that he didn't like, and the things that he'd do differently now, because it's got that same language thing, same language issue where the spoken language and the written language are really two separate languages. And before the TV show, nobody'd ever heard Dothraki spoken. So then he had to take the words on the page and turn them into a spoken language, and all. Very interesting to hear that process and how that worked. And if you're interested, shoot me an email or put a thing in here and I'll try to find it. But he talks about how he hates the word Khaleesi and how he wishes he could go back and redo Khaleesi because he screwed it up. And it's very interesting talking about just the things in his head and how he messed up Khaleesi. But it's, of course, one of the most famous Dothraki word, if not the most famous one. So very interesting. Thanks for sticking around again. I'll be in the chat room for a bit, and I will see you all next week.